And I'm going to start. And I start on time. Okay. Well, I want to, welcome all of you. There were 74 of you who registered, but you're popping in bit by bit, and I'm happy that you can all join us this morning. We're going to have a great discussion about board governance, how an effective board should function, and how to have effective board relations with staff and committees, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then we'll go to our breakouts where you can follow up in the discussions. And each of three of our panelists will be in one of each breakout session. And I'm not sure that there'll be that much difference between them. They're supposed to be facilitated discussions, and you can join one of the three, and we'll give you more information about that when the time comes. And as you see, this is being recorded, and we're going to be posting it to our YouTube channel in a few days. And to see it, please put on the agenda slide for now. Go ahead. Move to the agenda slide. You would go to our website and you'd look up WAVE program.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mary Jo. My screen is completely frozen. I'm sorry. Hold on just 1 second while I see if I can figure it out.
Well, otherwise I can call mine up and share.
Okay, sure. Hold on just 1 second. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I'll just talk over you while you do it. It just has the agenda on it. And I just want to tell people that to find past programs, you look on our website under WAVE programs and then scroll down to see archive of WAVE events. And the link to our YouTube channel will be there. And we will ask you to use the chat to ask questions or to post information you want to share with everybody. And Mary Alice Bowler of Arlington Neighborhood Village is our wizard behind the curtain, only she's behind a frozen curtain right now. And she will be telling you later about how to sign in for the breakout session. And since she is still frozen, I'm going to call up my PowerPoint and hold on, I want to get it to view, and I can run my own slides if I want to. So let me just do that if that's the best thing to do. Come on.
No, not much of a wizard right now, I'll say.
Okay, except now I have to unfreeze so I can go back to my Zoom and then share my screen. So hold on now. I will share my screen. Share my screen. Come on. I'm clicking on. I don't want to stop yours.
You can stop mine and see if that may help. That may boot me out of my frame.
I'll continue here then. Microsoft PowerPoint. Let's see if that's what I want. Come on. Give me my PowerPoint. Allow Zoom to share my screen. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Well, guys, this is absolute. Okay, so come on back there. Come on back there. I was so close, so close.
Okay, I'm for what it's worth, I think I'm back in action. I can certainly try again if everyone's willing to be a little patient.
Okay, well, I can start talking. It just told you that we're going to have our plenary in a few minutes. It'll last about an hour or more, and there'll be some time for questions there. And then we'll go to our breakouts, and we adjourn directly from the breakouts. So, okay, so let's go to the next slide now. Your screen isn't frozen. There we go. Already. Well, I do want to remind you that we have a mentoring and mutual support program, and we want you to both make requests for help, and we'd love for you to volunteer. We have a number of experienced people who are ready and eager to talk with you, and WAVE members and new villages are encouraged to go to our website and request a one-on-one mentor for any questions that you're facing. And if our people aren't able to answer them, why, we have an arrangement with the National Village to Village Network, and we plug into their national network of mentors. So if you have a problem, we think we've got someone who can help you. And we also welcome new mentors. There's a sign-up sheet on the website. By the way, that website that you see there includes both the request form, a request form for new villages, and a request form for established villages, and then a sheet for you to sign up and share your own expertise. We know there's a lot of expertise that that you've accumulated in your experience with your own villages or elsewhere. So I'm sure that you have something to offer. I mentioned that we've had Zoom programs that we call our mutual support sessions. Those are facilitated discussions about issues or common interests that people have. And you can find, as I mentioned previously, all of our past events on our website by going to WAVE programs, and then scrolling down to the WAVE archive. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, now the Finishing Strong program, wanted to remind you of that. We talked about this last year, and we are reopening it this year. This is for WAVE member villages who we hope will submit proposals for programs to encourage more conversations and discussions about end-of-life issues. I think many of you have signed up for the series of 3 Zoom sessions that Chris Palmer has offered to talk about end-of-life issues and what the resources are available to you. He did that because he and we really want villages to have a good foundation and to see how important these issues are and how they can go ahead and plan programs and execute programs on their own. The winner of the winning proposal or proposals may receive up to $5,000. So go to our website, wavevillages.org, Finishing Strong Award, and you'll see all the information about the award program. And you'll also find links to Chris's 3 prior programs there. We will be opening applications about mid-September, and they will be due about mid-November. And then we'll announce the winners at the quarterly meeting. So again, you do have to be a WAVE member to apply for this. And you can visit wavevillages.org/member villages and see if you see your village on there. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, mark your calendars. This year you get a full set of choices. The National Village to Village Network is holding another virtual set of sessions on October 3rd and 4th. And we're going to be having our first in-person program since 2019. Is that correct? I don't think I've seen it right. Since 2019 in the Silver Spring Civic Center on October 17th. And there will be, sessions about volunteers, about digital media, about frail members, about collaborating with other villages. We're going to have some interesting keynote speakers and many networking opportunities so that you can just learn from each other over birds of a feather table. There will be exhibits, and there will be more details about the program coming soon. And you can register by going to the WAVE site or to the VTV site. And on our site, you scroll down to the list of events. The virtual October 3rd and 4th and the 17th are listed separately, but you can click on either one of them and then click on register, because there are options on that registration page for you to register for just one or the other, or the combination of both. So please feel free to do that. Okay, next slide, please. Seal, do you think your panel is all ready? We're running a little early. Do you think everybody's ready?
I'm going to make sure everybody's here. Hold on.
Well, while you're doing that, I just want to thank Seal in advance, because Seal is the executive director of At Home in Alexandria, and she's the head of our program committee, which includes Doug Gaddis, Elizabeth Hale, and Lori Pross, I believe. And they have done a good job. They always want to think through, what do villages really need and want to learn, and how can we best share that with them? And I think some of you have been quite enthusiastic about the programs that they've put on so far this year. And again, yet another reminder that you can find the videos of those programs and all the materials on our WAVE Archives page. And if Seal thinks everybody is ready, since I'm springing this on them even earlier than I ever said,
Kathy Stevens, are you in the meeting yet?
I see her. She's just waiting to be admitted.
And Bill, are you here?
Yeah, Bill is on.
Oh, sorry. I'm scrolling up and down on my participants list.
Yeah, I see Bill. Is Pazit on yet?
I'm here.
And Anita's here. All right.
Well, so again, thanks to Steele, and I want to say special thanks to Pazit, who is communicating with us from Israel, correct?
That's
This
correct.
is truly a transcontinental program. So again, thank you, Steele. Take it away.
All right. All right. Thanks, Mary Jo. You can see here are 4 speakers on the panel. I'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to do this. First, I want to thank Pazit, Aviv, William, Bill Emmett, Kathy Stevens, and Anita Walgren. You can see their titles there. What we're going to do is have Pazit be the interviewer moderator. However, Pazit will weigh in. She's so much experience that we also want to hear, you know, her take on this as well, because she's worked with so many villages, staff and board relations come up quite often in the things that she helps villages work through. So, you know, Pazit, again, feel free to weigh in. I'm going to have each of our 4 panelists talk a little bit, just a couple minutes each about, you know, their perspective in this discussion. And, you know, we do, of course, welcome audience comments and questions, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and on the questions. I mean, we already have a series of questions that we have received in advance from attendees, and we have some other things that we went into the archives. We actually talked with past staff members and board members of villages. So we've got a group of questions to ask already. So what I'll do is when I see your comment in the chat, if it's related to what we're talking about, I'll go ahead and break in and ask your question. Otherwise, we might wait until the end if your question is vastly different from what we're talking about in the flow of the conversation. If that makes sense, I hope it does. So we want to make sure everybody has enough time for their questions, and we hope that this can be a space where we can kind of be upfront and open about things we might be struggling with. You can say asking for a friend, but you know, we're all trying to make our operations more efficient, more effective, and productive. And when we took a little survey at the end of 2022, WAVE did, we asked what topics were the most important to you. And this topic, board relations, bubbled near the top. So we wanted to make sure that we did spend some time on this topic. Certainly, there's a lot that could be said about board recruitment, and this won't be the only time that we address the topic, but it's a great start. So I think I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Pazit now, and thank you all. I'm going to ask that you all mute and your sound, and then we'll get going. Go ahead, Pazit.
Thank you, Sue. Wanted to thank everybody for thinking of this topic as worthy of WAVE's attention in this meeting. Many of the boards that we've been working with have dealt with situations on a more private level, and sometimes people who are either staffers or boards tend to think that this situation is unique to them, and as such are concerned about exposing certain challenges. But I think that the strength of organization is by admitting challenges and figuring things out in a way that feels safe. And so I hope that this session feels safe to you. As Steele had said, you don't have to get into specifics or details. You can be more broad in your conversation, but our aim is to be real and keep things authentic so that you feel like your questions can be answered. As Steele had said, I've been working with county villages for many, many years and have seen a lot you can never say in the village movie that you've seen it all, because it's not possible to have seen it all. There's always new things and different things, but it's all good. That's what keeps things interesting. So we're gonna let Bill, Kathy, and Anita introduce themselves and say a few words about their perspective. And then I'm going to use, we can go about it in two ways. We have a list of questions that have been introduced, presented to us. And you can also put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and ask them. So we'll try to make sure that all those questions are answered. So I'm handing it off to Bill.
Okay, well, thank you, Pazit, and thank you, Seal, and thank you, Mary Jo. It's wonderful to be here today. So my name is Bill Emmett. I'm actually the president of Mount Pleasant Village, and I realize I probably should have edited this this sheet just to say that, because, and I think it's a little bit of a significant difference in that Mount Pleasant Village is a volunteer managed village. So as president, I am indeed the board chair, but I guess I also find myself in a variety of other roles that define themselves as they emerge. And it means, I think, trying to manage the way our volunteer board members, our volunteer committee chairs, and just the volunteers in general who lend their time and effort to running the village work together. Mount Pleasant Village is about, I think I've got this right, about 8 years old. As we try to define ourselves, I think we would say that we're a mature village. But one thing I'm learning as I mature myself is that the way to be an effective, mature person is to continue to grow and learn. And so we're trying to do that, and just, you know, out of necessity are growing and learning as situations develop. So I think we're a healthy village. I think we've come through COVID and all of the challenges that were associated with that quite well. We seem to continue to have appropriate turnover on the board and appropriate turnover among our volunteers. But I think we want to have more. We want to continue to recruit people to be engaged. And I think the last thing I'll say is I think engagement is really key. I think making sure that people feel engaged and feel ownership in what we do is really important in whatever role they're playing, whether it's board member, committee member, committee chair. I think making sure that people feel that what they're doing is important and helps contribute to the success of the village. So I hope that's a proper introduction of myself. So.
Thank you. Moving on to Kathy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm going to introduce myself in two ways, as you can see from all the words behind my name. For this presentation, primarily I'm here in my role as a consultant with a firm called Capacity Partners, which does consulting for nonprofits in the Maryland, Virginia, and DC area on a variety of matters: strategic planning, fundraising, coaching, and certainly board development. And in particular, I focus on strategic planning and board work. And I have worked with several of the villages here in Montgomery County on some strategic planning work, and tied in with that usually is some board development. How do we work with our board? How do we think about board succession and things like that? And I come to that consultant role, which is very part-time for me. I am full-time executive director with the Montgomery Coalition for Adult, and there's a word missing, Adult English Literacy in my title. We coordinate this nonprofit that I run, coordinates all of the adult ESOL services in Montgomery County. So English classes for speakers of other languages. And I've been an executive director here for 11 years. And of course, have in that time had a board to whom I report. And am always working with them on board development and their roles and responsibilities. And then I've served on, I've lost track at this point, honestly, a number of boards I've served on as well. So I bring my personal and professional experience to this panel, but really here with my hat on as a part-time consultant who's done some work with some villages and of course other nonprofits in Virginia, DC, and Maryland. So thank you all. It's a pleasure to be with the villages.
Righty, and last but not least, Anita. You're on mute.
Can everybody hear me? I'm not sure if my audio is at the right level. Okay. I'm Anita Walgren. Arlington Neighborhood Village was set up in 2013. Carol Peckett and a number of other neighborhood volunteers got together every week with a great idea, which is to establish a village or multiple villages was the original plan in Arlington. Some of you may remember that. But I became president and board chair in I think it was January 2016. It's hard to remember, isn't it? So I had been in a lot of different capacities, but I was not a founder. And it is an interesting perspective to come to an organization that's really got excellent volunteers to get it started up with a passion and a lot of desire and varying experiences in terms of board management, meeting experience, how to run meetings, how to relate to one another as expecting things to get done, and creating a plan that's going to take your organization from a really good idea with some passionate volunteers into a sustainable operation for the future. That's really a big challenge. And we focused, I would like to think, and we still do, with the help of excellent staff and excellent board people who actually I'm off the board, been off the board for a while, don't even know some of the board members anymore. And that's, in my opinion, a great thing. So I really focused on communicating with people on the board one-on-one. So I got to know everybody on the board. We tried to plan every meeting that I was a part of before the event. Nobody came in with big surprises, usually. And then we all went through board training together, including our staff. And that's something I'm going to keep highlighting. And Kathy and I have already talked about the importance of getting your organization at whatever place you are into some sort of joint training so that you can talk to each other based on the information you learn. And then I think the other point Kathy and I agree on, and others would, I hope, is document what jobs you're being asked to do. And that means a board member position description, an executive director position description, anybody who's doing anything, and try to have those pieces of documentation supported by everybody in the organization. So that's, I've been in a lot of different boards. Maybe that helped bring some experience. I can tell some funny stories and some profound stories, and I certainly look forward to the discussion today.
All right, so I was told I speak too softly and I am now shouting. Can you all hear me better?
Mm-hmm.
No, maybe better now. Let me see if my volume needs to be addressed.
I can hear you fine, so perhaps some people have their
Yeah.
volume turned down.
I'm gonna try. Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better, Spazit.
Good. Problem solved. Okay, so we intend this to be a sort of a flowing session with people asking their questions. We have received 2 questions that are very specific. I am thinking about starting with some broader conversation to get us sort of to whet our appetite for this conversation, and then we'll introduce the 2 more specific questions. And so let's just start with some kind of a generic discussion about what do the 3 of you think about 2 or 3 key points about effective board relations, whether it is internal to them or with their staff/committees. And let's start off with Anita.
Maybe I already sort of jumped ahead.
Okay.
Because really, I'm just going to keep saying what I think is really important is that the board chair recognize that they're wearing 2 different hats. And that is whether you're right at the beginning of a village development or really into it. Your board is your people, your team, and you need to communicate and know each person on a one-to-one basis, in my opinion, and understand why are they even volunteering for this? I mean, this is hard work. This is something that you want to partner with. And then what shall we do together as a group? And you as the board chair are the hub and the spoke of the board. Whether you've got committees and whether the board people are the ones actually trying to run the volunteers and the membership and the other things going on, or whether you've got the executive director is a big step. So my opinion is communication then with the board about where are we in getting some support to get our job done. What do we want to keep the board people doing and what do we want our executive director to do? Those would be really the most important top level things for the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the third quarter when you're getting ready to plan the next year, and basically every time you meet, that's what I would talk about.
Kathy?
I'd be happy to build on that because I think Anita's taking us in a really good direction, and I would step back maybe just a pre-step. And this goes for boards that are just forming and boards that are recruiting new people. I think it's really important to understand the different roles individuals can play on a board and then what the collective role of a board is. So individuals, we often say in boards, and this may be more for larger nonprofits, but you can bring time, you can bring treasure, you can bring talent. And I also always say that becoming a board member is a process of discernment. It's a process of discernment for the individual, and it's a process of discernment for the organization or the existing board. Do my reasons for volunteering as a board member match up with what the organization can give me? And likewise, does what the organization need match up with what I can give the organization? So it's making sure that it's a good fit. Any of us who want to volunteer, we want to make sure we're getting something out of it. I think someone said, you know, it needs to be fun. Well, you need to feel like you're bringing something to it and that it's not all drudgery and that it's not all hard work. It is. I mean, Anita and others have made that good point. It is hard work, but you want to, I think the boards I've volunteered on, I want to learn from people. I want to be collaborative. I want to be collegial, all towards a goal, making your village do the things that you want the village to do. And at the same time, there's some very clear expectations of a board. A board has fiduciary and legal responsibility for the entity. Often there's a strategic planning responsibility, making sure that the strategic direction of the organization is met. There are other things that happen. And again, I'm speaking generally. I very much recognize that villages have different models in terms of whether or not you have staff, whether or not, like the Mount Pleasant Village, you're all a volunteer run. So I'm speaking generally, and I do recognize there are different models out there, but boards have to be responsible for resource allocation, for community engagement, for the vision for the organization. If there is a paid executive director, for hiring, evaluating, and hopefully not, but perhaps firing the executive director. So maintaining that kind of supervisory relationship. And then certainly making sure the documents are in good order, the bylaws, operating documents, and things like that. So there's some very individual things, you know, what am I bringing as a volunteer? What can I offer? Am I an accounting whiz? Do I have communications background? Do I have community organizing background? Do I bring something particular to the board I'm on? And then my role as a board member is as a fiduciary and these other things that I've laid out. And so Anita mentioned this, having in writing kind of job descriptions, volunteer descriptions, being really clear on roles and responsibilities from the get-go and clarifying that and making adjustments. As volunteers, not all of us can do 100% of the things we think we need to do all the time. Life happens, and just being very upfront and communicative about what's happening among one another to make sure that things, someone says, I've got to pause on this for 2 months. I've got a family matter I have to, deal with. I think that's appropriate and then can help diffuse any of the things that come up where there's a conflict, where so-and-so didn't do this. Well, if some communication had happened up front, that might have happened. I've probably gone on too long. I apologize for that. But some of the initial framing I wanted to offer in terms of individual responsibilities and then the collective responsibilities and role of the board.
I don't have much to add to what Kathy and Anita said, really. I might frame it a little bit differently. I think that in our village, we recognize that we're in a place where most of our members, and therefore most of our board members, are people who've had, by and large, successful professional lives, and many of them have worked in nonprofits of different descriptions and or in government service or in other places. So we're very fortunate that we can rely on their experience and their understanding of how things work. So it's not, we're not, as I have been in some other organizations earlier in my career, we're not in a place where we have to sort of start with making sure everybody understands the basics, though we do need to remind them that we all have the responsibilities that Kathy was just referring to, the fiduciary responsibilities and so forth. But really, in the end, I think for our board, we recognize that we're doing this for our own, well, for fun to begin with. It is fun. We want to make sure it's fun. And we're doing it for our own reasons of wanting to stay engaged in our community. And so really, that's what we want to build on, and that's what we want to emphasize. And that means that when people come up with good ideas, we want to support that. And even if they're a little bit out of the mainstream or out of, outside of what we've done before, we want to move forward with those, because if they're conceivably within the mission of the organization, we want to give people the opportunity to run with them a little bit. We've got to make sure that we're all coordinated and we're all working in the same direction. But we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to really, in a sense, indulge themselves. And then I would also just emphasize something else that Kathy said in a different way, which is we have to be forgiving of one another. First of all, villages do something that's very important, but we're not, the fate of the planet doesn't hinge on what we do. And so we can't take it too seriously. We do have to be forgiving. And so if somebody, tunes out and misses a meeting or fails to meet a deadline, there's no benefit in quote unquote holding them accountable in a sort of punitive way. It really makes sense to just say, okay, we're all humans and we're going to make mistakes, but as long as we're moving forward, that's good enough for us. And it's I think that for Mount Pleasant Village, in any case, those are a couple of ways in which we keep our board happy and engaged and more or less prevent any sort of internal strife.
Thank you. If I might add, I think that there's something that when we start villages, there's a lot of trajectory that are being determined early on in terms of organizational culture. And one of the things that I try to recommend board members do, and I've seen that also on boards that I sit on, is the need to engage with other board members in informal ways. So go out for happy hour, go have lunch together, dedicate some time, even if you're really busy, do the first half hour for just informal relations. Because I think we're human. We don't come to a board kind of tabula rasa. We come with our relationship, with our expectations, with a level of trust. And sometimes if you don't have trusting relationships that are based on time spent with somebody, you might either misinterpret what they say or perceive them as even hostile. And so by forming interpersonal relationship within boards, you will find that the board then becomes much more trusting of one another and therefore more effective. It really does boil down to relationships that you build in the formal part of your time spent working on the village, but also when you just have leisure. And the fun can be had in both, but when you just say, okay, now I'm just having fun, I'm letting down my guard, I'm not so busy protecting my views and how things should or shouldn't be, I'm just simply being myself and I'm getting to know other people, I'm much more likely to listen, to accept what people are saying, see their point of view, and therefore have a much smoother conversation in a group. So a combination. I have a question that came in, and I will read it as it was written out. What if a board, especially a chair board, has unreasonable expectations of staff? For example, overlooking the fact that they may be supposed to be working only 30 hours per week, and there's some resource limitations. Kathy?
Thanks, Pazit. So I just want to make sure I heard the question correctly. It's a board chair who might have unreasonable expectations of the staff, the paid staff, the ED, that kind of thing.
Board chair, I think boards are very excited to get to the point where they can hire staff and they think that this person is going to be their panacea. Here's all our problems solved.
All our things. Yes.
One human being. And how do you then negotiate, communicate? What's your thought on that?
A couple thoughts. I think this goes to some themes that we've already touched on. Making sure that there is a clear job description, and that I always feel like there's an on-ramp time period when someone gets started to figure out the ways to do a job most efficiently and how much time things are going to take. And then that goes to prioritization for the board and for the staff person, making sure that there's alignment on what the priorities are, so that the staff person is not feeling like they're asked to do things that are not in their in the mutually agreed on list of priorities. So I think then if you have a job description, if you're understanding that things are evolving, new relationships, that kind of thing, and making sure that you have a clear sense of priorities, then it's much easier for then things to be discussed. And I always, and I do this with my board chair, I do this with boards that I have been the chair for, have a regular check-in time set, whether that's weekly, monthly, whatever is the right frequency and cadence for that board, that relationship, so that the board chair and the ED can say, here's what we're working on. This took a lot longer, and therefore I haven't gotten to these stated priorities. I wanted to let you know I'm going in this direction. So it does kind of come back to that communication. And I think, like Bill said too, that kind of understanding and forgiveness. Certainly paid staff might be a little bit different, but we're all human, and these things sometimes take twists and turns to try to get something done that we don't anticipate. And so I think that as much clarity as you can get up front, but then it's a continually evolving discussion of, wow, you won't believe it, I couldn't get to priorities 2, 3, and 4 because we had this donor walk in the door and obviously had to deal with that, or the website crashed, or something like that happens as well. I also use a tool that was offered to me by an executive coach that I worked with. If the board has expectations that things need to get done and they seem like a good idea, I often talk about things in terms of a pilot. So let's try this for 60 days. Let's try this for 3 months and see how it fits into the time in the day, the resources available, that kind of thing, so that you can share with the board chair, yes, I'd like to do this, but let's pilot it and see how's it working, what results are we getting, what extra time it takes, that kind of thing. So I think that's one tangible tool I can offer, in addition to the themes that we've been talking about clarifying expectations, and then knowing that's an ongoing check-in process between the board chair and the ED.
Can I add to that? I'm just going to say that I think the pilot idea is excellent. It's important that the board chair and whatever new paid staff person, and I think Bill's been lucky, and we have too at Arlington, to have incredible experienced people who have had successful careers. And now they want to participate with our little nonprofit to get started and get going. So it hasn't been that people are not used to having responsibility, but it's mutually agreeing on what is the responsibility of this new 30-hour-a-week person, or 20 hours a week, or 10 hours a week. And the pay is not going to be tremendous. So you've got to have some reasonable expectations about what the new staff person is able to do, and look at the V2V network resources. I do think that there are many, many job descriptions for different kinds of staff people that have been put on by years of village experience. And then now I've already forgotten what this other point was that I wanted to follow up that Kathy had. That was so good. Well, anyhow, that's enough.
It'll come back to you, I'm sure.
I'm going to turn it to another question that was presented to us. What do you do with the board member who is emeritus and still stays on the board and wields their, what you might call, informal authority? How do you manage that? Bill, any thoughts on that?
Well, I can start with that, although not from real experience in Mount Pleasant. I think we've been very fortunate. We no longer have any of the founders on our board. That rotation, I think, completed a couple of years ago, and it was a natural progression, and it was the way to be. And I think part of the success of that was that the people who rotated off earlier provided a very good example for the others. I think it's just important to continue to give the message to everyone that for the organization to remain vital, it needs to have new people involved, new blood, as we say, although that sounds a little bloody, but that's not
Empiric.
so. But I think if you emphasize that the future of the organization depends on constant renewal, I think that's the point that we've made. And again, maybe because we're dealing with a lot of experienced people, they get that and they understand that, and they have not stood in the way. So I don't have good advice on what happens when you're dealing with people who don't get that, but it's just building that into the kind of weaving it into the fabric of the organization from the get-go, I think, is very important.
I see Mary Jo.
Well, I wanted to add to that, and one of the things I've loved about this conversation, and I think Kathy was very good, she's interjecting a little bit of humor, a little bit of lightness into how you handle these stresses. And it occurred to me that the founder of our country stepped away from the presidency. And if there's any way to say, well, this is part of our culture, just like George Washington, the leader steps away and makes room for the next person, just couldn't resist.
I think I love that reference. Yeah. And also, I think it's also helpful for the person who's got to break the news to be able to point to some third-party source of information like best practices or the V2V network or even the WAVE organization that I learned at the last meeting that this is how they recommend we go forward, which is not to have emeritus participate in these activities.
I was just gonna add on to what Mary Jo said. She had such a nice example, and I was just gonna say we're all human, right? We want to, particularly for someone who's been a founder or served on the board for a long time. There's probably a need to still feel needed or wanted or valued. So providing Mary Jo got to this, but I would just put a little finer touch on it. Figuring out a way to help that person transition to a quote new role, or give them something very specific that they're always going to introduce the fundraiser, the new board chair, or something like that. Give them a role, give them something that can help them remain engaged, but leave the board functions to the current board functions. So help identify something that would feel good for them. And that's just a conversation, I think.
Excellent points. I really, really appreciate all your wisdom. I think that we're covering things really nicely, and I'm going to switch it up to a little different question. And I've heard that a lot. Whether you are a developing village or a regular board, what do you do when there's people who joined your group and they just don't seem to pull their weight? What do you about that? Who wants to take that first? Nobody.
Well, I certainly can jump in if, although Anita, you unmuted yourself. Anita, do you want to go first, or you want me to go?
Well, it's in the eye of the beholder, You really do, as a board chair, if that's what the person is, has to meet the person where they are and say, what's going on? Did we miscommunicate, or whatever they want to say about the expectation that they had is somehow not being met? But, the other person thinks I'm doing a heck of a job. So if you need to find that out, and whether that is a paid staff person or a board member or a committee chair or what have you, it's really about communicating.
I see Wendy, and then I'll turn it to Kathy.
Yeah, and Anita was my board chair, so it's fun to share information. After she left the board, in the recent past, we actually had a board member who came on, we thought was enthusiastic, and then never came to a meeting. Time after time after time, we had meetings, and we don't have frequent meetings. It was like every other month, but he missed the get together in January. He missed this, he missed that, and we communicate with him. And sometimes we didn't even get a response from the communications, and it required us just to take the action in the middle of the year. The board chair had a conversation with him, and we said it just doesn't seem to be a good fit, and he resigned. And I think it is a matter of just not letting it go. This was obviously an extreme example, but it was didn't work out, and the request was, I think you probably not a good fit, you might want to resign, and he did.
You can prevent a lot of that by being clear up front. And I see in the chat that Lynn Gullah-Rafrano from here in DC has said, we've established responsibilities for board members, and they sign those commitments every year. We do that in our board. We refresh people's memories about what they're committing to, and I think that takes care of a lot of it. We haven't had anybody really falling down. And then the other thing is, as I think others have said, just have to recognize that people contribute in different ways. Not everybody's going to be the same gung-ho, charging forward committee member that we might picture. People contribute in different ways, and we have to recognize what those ways are and be open to that. So
I just would echo real quick, Bill. I know Denise has her hand up, but just to say, even the best laid plans, making sure you have your board commitment and all of that up front, things change for people. They realize they can't do it. Things change in their lives. And so it's just a conversation like Wendy had mentioned. Hey, what's going on? Is this something that we think we can address, or is this just not a fit? And for the integrity of the board, let's just call it a day, basically.
Denise.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of mention 2 points about this. One is, for example, on my board, we have one board member who very rarely comes to meetings. But we've talked about it, the rest of the board, and we're clear that we still want her on the board because of connections that she brings. And I think that it's important, if there is somebody who's not following sort of the standard level of involvement, that either, you know, as people have already said, you sit down and have a conversation and say, you know, maybe this isn't a good fit. If you don't either do that or have a conversation of, do we still want to keep this person on for other reasons, it can have a very negative impact on morale of the rest of the board. So, you know, you get resentment building up. You know, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and this person isn't doing anything, and why am I bothering, and so on. But my point is also that as long as it's clear as to why that person's on the board to the rest of the board, you can avoid that resentment.
I just want to a couple of points, and I see Leila wanted to make some, so a couple of things I think critical. Sometimes if you see people who come in very excited and all of a sudden they become disengaged, goes back to my original comment about relationships. It's possible that something has happened where there's someone spoke to them wrong, or their feelings got hurt, or they did something and they thought they would get good feedback and they didn't. And so people are people. And so it's good to check in, not like, are you doing or not doing your job? Because we have done established relationship responsibilities. People, when they enjoy an activity, when they feel this is not just fun, but true meaning comes out of it, you're not going to have to pursue them to do their duties. They will simply do it because they're committed and they enjoy it. And so these two things go hand in hand. So check in with people. And I will say one more thing, and we talked about that. Both Bill and Anita had mentioned the fact that a lot of people come into Village's board with plenty of experience. But most of those most of those nonprofits are larger, and the board functions in those organizations are more advisory in nature. And part of your orientation is to assume people think of an advising board role versus a working board, because it does look different. Expectations are really different. It's not just you sit there and share your wonderful wisdom and pull in some money. It's you're actually expected to function a little bit as a staff person and fulfill these functions that in other large organization, it would be the purview of staff. And so even just stating that can help clarify a lot of the expectations up front, but I'm going to let Leila go ahead.
Pazit, you covered so much of where I was going, but one of the first things that I wanted to share is how we fall into an always everyday way of being when we're already on a board. We already have our relationships. We bring somebody in, we think that we're welcoming them, but in truth, often you feel a little bit left out. You don't have all the inside information. The conversations that happen need layers of translation, and just to be very deliberate and take care in that can go a long way to bringing a new board member on board for that. The other thing that I really want to bring forward is that aspect of joy. The balancing between, yes, it is difficult work, and the reminder to what are the ways in which you can bring joy to each and every experience and to celebrate what people are bringing to the table. The other thing, and Denise, I'm glad that Denise brought up about there are people who serve on boards in different ways and how to manage those expectations, because people will feel, why does that person doesn't do this? But one of the things is to recognize what are the skill sets that are at the table. And there can very much be really valuable board members who work behind the scenes, but are far less comfortable to step forward into on-the-spot conversations, because the way in which they contribute is to step back and think, and then to come in. So the idea of the connection beyond the board meetings and how it's very difficult, but how to try to maintain connection in between board meetings. The board meetings are not where all the work happens. So thank you.
Awesome. Mary Jo.
Well, I do see a question in the chat that maybe we should take first, because I think he beat me to it. Scott asks, any thoughts about whether it's a good idea to have a married or committed couple on the board?
I would start with how many people are on the board, which I thought was a good point for everybody to sort of think about anyhow. We started, our bylaws are up to 13, and we started with, I think, 6. And that is a very nice size board. And personally, I would think on a board that size, it would be an issue for a couple to be 2 votes, if you will, on the board at that size. If it's a 30-person board, maybe not so much,
Anita, you're assuming they get along.
Right.
Gotta say it. Sorry. Any other thoughts? I see Jerry's hand and I think she's got something to share. Go ahead. But you're on mute, so you might want to do that unmuting thing.
Okay. And I yielded my spot to Scott, but I wanted to just add something. And I think I was, you called on me before and I directed you to Scott.
But I wanted to just say, let's adjourn this conversation about Scott's question with Jerry, and then we'll go back to you,
Okay.
Mary.
Okay.
I think she's picking me because I'm part of a married couple on a board.
Oh.
We're 9 people on the board, and actually Kendall and I are founders, and both of us dragged our husbands in, mostly to help us because they had the skills that we needed. My husband I'm acting as president for the last year or so. And Richard came on to help me with the finances because I begged him to. I said, I need you. Kendall's husband came on to help us with legislative and legal experience. So that's why they're there. Amos has now moved off, Kendall's husband, but Richard's still there very much because he's needed. I don't know if it presents a problem to the others, and it's a good thing to be bringing this up. And I think I'm going to be asking at the next board meeting. Not that we can do anything about it, because I think that we both are working so hard. I don't think the board could do without either of us at this point.
Well, one
So
thing that
that's the
I
issue.
might mention is we have at the beginning, especially when you have a very limited number of people and then you have the great talent that appear in couples, why not? But we did find a way. We had one spouse be the chair of a committee. And in fact, the nominations committee, which was a really important thing. And so there was a lot of interplay with the person who was on the board and the chair of the committee. Maybe the legal person could be on another function rather than being on the board at the same time as the partner.
Yeah. No, I think that Richard would happily leave as the financial person. I don't let him go is the problem.
Right.
But that's our issue. The function is needed. We tried. He took a year off. We tried. It just didn't work out. And he's been scrambling to make up for the problems that happened in the year he was gone. So, it's an interesting point to look at. And I think I'm going to bring it up to the board to find out, just are we presenting a problem? I don't know that we always vote the same way either. We're both pretty strong individuals, but it's 2 needed skills. And I just have to point that out.
I think this is a really interesting conversation, and it's probably more specific to villages and organizations like villages and some of the larger nonprofits. And I think Anita's point is a good one in that you can take advantage of people's expertise and skills without having them be on a board. Chair a committee. If it is, I think there just needs to be then whoever said, well, what if they don't get along? Or you're assuming that they get along, because if you don't have a process or a procedure in place to deal with that, I could see in a rare instance how that could become a real challenge. But as I think Anita said, when you're starting a board, when you need to get certain things done, you take advantage of anyone who can come and provide what you need. So it's an interesting balance. I'm not sure I've faced that situation in other situations. There was a nonprofit I did a strategic planning exercise with, where the founders of the organization were a husband and wife, and you could see some tensions in how they were doing their things, but we worked it out with the rest of the board too. So it's just takes some careful thought.
I want to add to this. I think the point about founders rolling off the board is an excellent point, and both of us would love to be in that position of being able to roll off the board. What do you do if you can't get replacements? That is what I have been struggling with.
That is a whole challenge for not only village boards, but other boards, kind of that recruitment and succession planning. And I've done some work with some of the village boards in Montgomery County on that. So it's a longer discussion, Jerry.
Yep.
I'm going to say that should be actually one of the going in points every year for the organization to be working on whatever the next
We
step
are.
in the organization is. And if that next step, in your opinion, should be succession on the board, and the officers and the volunteers, everybody needs to be working together on that. And you do by that knowing up front that this is the year we are going to lose this person. It does help everybody focus on the fact that we're going to lose this person. We've had many excellent volunteers over the years do different functions, but if you get enough notice in advance that this is going to be their last year or 6 months or whatever they are willing to do, you don't want them coming to the person saying, I'm done next week, by the way.
Right. See,
I
that's
just wanna
not the
highlight
issue.
fact- Hold on, I'm gonna pause here. This is a conversation about board relations. And I think that when you have a good relations between board and board members and staff, you're much more likely to successfully recruit people. But we're gonna stay focused on not recruitment and succession, but on board relations. And so I want to recognize Mary Jo, who's been waiting very patiently.
Well,
and then-
that's okay. I was going to pick up on several threads, and my question or comment does get into board succession, but it specifically has to do with, and I think Kathy has a comment in about a matrix of the skills and experience needed. I think that can go as you're thinking about board relations and filling slots, why it's good to know what do you actually need, not just who are the warm bodies available. But that brings up a question again. I'm sorry, this is a little bit about succession planning, where most bylaws state, an officer's term is X years. Let's say 2 is pretty common, and often they can serve, and they may serve up to 3 terms. The expectation is set that they are automatically renominated each time. And so what I want to call it, because this does get into the question of relationships, is this is what we're talking about in WAVE. We are trying to set up a culture where the expectation is that every fall we take a look at what we need, and it is not a done deal that everybody is automatically reelected to the next term. But you can imagine in terms of relationships, how delicate that can be, who's making the decision, and making that as a policy and a culture up front is very difficult. Now, again, I sympathize with the succession of, but there's somebody we really need. But I just want to say, as part of your culture of, well, yes, we're all together, but there'll be a time when maybe we will have to refresh without you just expiring your 3 terms.
Yeah, just in terms of board relations, the comment I put in there about them having a matrix, that's helpful so everybody knows each other's strengths, proclivities. Someone might say, I don't want to be out in front of people, but I will do all the behind the scenes stuff. And so just in terms of communicating and understanding who brings what to the board. So it's not just about succession planning, but it's about knowing who you have and what each other is best suited to do. What's their hidden talent? What's their out front talent? That kind of thing. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
So I want to respond, I think, a little bit to Mary Jo's situation she was describing. I think it's important to try to have some objective way of assessing the board's effectiveness, basically. And I think one way to do that is to have a governance committee that really is charged with looking after the health of the board specifically, and with doing that kind of independent assessment. So, for instance, in Mount Pleasant Village, we have a governance committee that's made up of two people. It's two members of the board, but they're not officers. They're not, that's their major role. So they essentially look down the road and see what the term expirations will be, what the turnover will be, and then start early on thinking about how to fill the slots that will open up. And part of that is an assessment of how people are performing and whether in fact it makes sense to ask somebody to return for another term as a board member. But I think baking in some way to have that objective assessment is really important. And so that it's not just coming from the board chair, for example.
All right, we're switching gears a little bit to cover some other topics. Let's think about staff board relations. What do you think about a situation where the village board, executive committee does not bring the executive director to their meetings? And so decisions are made without the ED's input, feedback, comments, questions. Who wants to take that one? Should the ED attend the executive committee meeting?
I'll jump in. I'm sure others have things to say, but I think it's pretty standard practice for an executive director to be in executive committee meetings. I can't really imagine a scenario where that wouldn't be, except maybe in two scenarios. But I think it's if there's something that the executive committee, for instance, they're getting together to do an executive director performance review, they want to share some comments before the review is delivered by the board chair. That might be one, but I'm not even sure that's a meeting. That's probably an email exchange, perhaps. But if there was, the only other situations I can see that in is where there's an extreme problem, like there's a suspicion of embezzlement or something like that, where the executive committee needs to have the conversation because they think there's a problem with. But in terms of making decisions, setting policy, making decisions for the organization, I'd love it if someone thinks I'm wrong on this, but I can't. I think the ED should be in there with the executive committee for all meetings.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Kathy. There's always the mechanism of going to executive session and asking the ED to or the staff to leave, and so the board can have their private conversation. But if you're, whatever decision you're making, you want the staff to be involved in that.
I think a lot of the questions that have come up pertain to the issue of boundaries between staff and boards, in the sense that sometimes there is either too much, in the sense that the board, especially a working board that had been doing a lot of things and then brought on staff, they're so accustomed to just be those hands-on individuals. And so they seem to be interfering with the day-to-day operations of the organizations because they just they own this. This is their organization, right? So sometimes there's too much of that. And there could be the other sort of opposite problem of, and we've talked about that before, where the board just says, okay, we have staff member, and then everything gets dumped on that individual. And I think we've talked about the real importance of having a benchmark. So compare yourself to other operating villages, especially if you're starting out with staff, and say, okay, how can we calibrate the way we perceive our relations compared to other villages? What's normal, what's to be expected, what's not too much or too little in the forming of those relationships. And I just want to hear more about your experiences, whether people who are here participating, how have they experienced that interactions, and our esteemed panelists, what do you have to say about that?
I'll just say, I think it really is very specific to the village and the board and the staff. And I'm not sure I think we have taken advantage. I know we have taken advantage of other villages' tips and advice, and especially at the beginning. But even now, I believe we frequently call and ask do you have a thus and such paid person, or how do you get this done? Or we've got a person that's uniquely capable of this, and I'm not sure if they should be a chair or what we should do. So I know we've looked at other villages, but we ended up making decisions that we felt were best for the people we had with the unique skills and qualifications in our particular village. I don't know if that is really responsive, but
All right, I have another question that came in, and that is, I have to read it in its letter so that I don't misrepresent it. How do you feel or deal with board members who speak negatively to members about the organization and yet have sway and standing with members? Somebody on the board who is supposedly, you know, representing the leadership of the board, and they sit on the board, and then in side conversation and other things seem to be speaking negatively about the very organization they lead. It's a tricky one, hmm?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a challenging one. I mean, to me, it comes back to having probably what is a challenging conversation, but to remind that person about what their duty is as a board member. And that goes back to the fiduciary duty and those kinds of things, and really laying out. And if they don't feel that they can meet that, if they have critique, whatever, sure. But if they can't meet their responsibilities as a board member, pardon me, they need to exit the board. Then they can feel free to critique, though I probably wouldn't put it that way. But, you know, and then how do you turn that criticism or those concerns into, are these things we can address? Are these things that are you alone feeling, that kind of thing? But I would say the starting point is your responsibility as a board member is as a fiduciary one to the organization. So you're not fulfilling your responsibility as a board meeting with that type of behavior.
where the question comes up is the person who has identified the issue is in some function on a board or as an executive director, because that's what we're doing today. So if you know there's an issue, it's time to find out what's at the bottom of it. And that is difficult and not easy. But if the person's not in line with the mission, Kathy's got it. They shouldn't be functioning as part of the leadership. But if it's about they're complaining to others about the leadership, then they need to work that out.
Phil, go ahead.
I was just thinking about, I know we have all board members sign a confidentiality agreement and all that, but I wonder if there should be some language in such a document as that to say, to honor your commitment to the board, we understand that, side converse, I don't even know what I would say because I'm in terms of the language, but I can see, and I will say that our board structure is that most of our board members come from our membership. I know that's not how every village board is structured. It just seems to be where a lot of our board members are recruited from, because we know them. They're the ones who've shown a commitment and interest and involvement with the organization, and that's a big part of what they would do on the board. But they all know each other so well that I think maybe inadvertently you could be having some side conversation with a friend who happens to be a board, a village member, not on the board. It can happen. You can slip into that area of quite unintentionally. So would there be any value in having something written that expresses, I don't know.
I just want to respond. Sorry, Kathy. I'm going to say it this way. Like every human organization, whether it is small microorganizations such as our villages or a larger country, and we're seeing it play out every day, there's only so much you can legislate. There's a lot that goes into the way we interact that is in the realm of norms and expectations of what is acceptable behavior. And we can't write every single expectation down because certain things are so, I wouldn't say obvious, but yes, I'll say obvious. It is obvious that if you're a member of a board and then you leave a board meeting and you go to another member's homes and start bad mouthing the very board / organization you're a part of, then there's an issue. And I don't know, a piece of paper would have changed that. And that I think goes back and ties into the comment I wanted to say about this particular question. I think that most human beings that you will meet will have goodwill and desire to cooperate, collaborate, participate, communicate. And yet there are those who are not such individuals, and they can come across as very charming, and you can maybe fall to their charms and bring them in and into your confidence. And then you find out like, oh my God, this person is like toxic. And we have to say it because there are some toxic people out there. And so I think that it's good to have a well-functioning board so that if something does happen, that you have a person that just not a good fit, you have enough organizational integrity to identify that and nip it in the bud. If you brought this person and it's not a good fit, you can say, I'm sorry, this is not a good fit. We're going to have to ask you to leave. And that is okay. And I think it's difficult conversations, but what happens if you don't, people like that can poison the waters. Sometimes it takes only one person to really shake things up and change the relationship and interactions. And so this is, I mean, if there's anything that I consider to be particularly challenging, isn't the lists of responsibilities or the matrix on the benchmarking or the boundaries. It's what you do when you have really particularly difficult individuals who insert themselves into leadership and then like they shake things up. So I'm going to let Bill and then Wendy go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, Pazit. I mean, you're dealing with people and they're going to say what they're going to say. But I think, I mean, the first board I ever served on, it was impressed upon me that one of the duties that I had as a board member was the duty of loyalty. That the duty was to, we could argue all we wanted within the confines of the board, but what we presented to the membership or to the external world had to be loyal to whatever decision was made within those confines. And so I think fundamentally that's what you're looking for, I think, Seal, when you were talking about having something in place that you can point to. It's just, it's a fundamental duty of board membership. So.
You know, the one thing I'll add that just makes it a complicated issue, and I'm not offering a solution, is that sometimes the folks that we're talking about may have made significant contributions to the organization in the past. And you've got to, you know, there's a whole mix that comes about as to how you manage this process. And I'm not necessarily talking about a board member who is bad-mouthing the organization externally. That's not the issue that comes up. But we just have board members who, many of them have made not only, you know, Kathy said in the beginning, time, treasure, talent. And some of them have made treasure contributions. And it's managing that process that just takes some deftness to it.
Denise.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, I've worked in nonprofits for, I don't know, 45 years now. And while that issue of loyalty is something that can be present in any board, I think the fact that villages are so ingrown, you know, everybody knows everybody kind of thing, even if you have a large village. And so I think that makes it even more difficult because I'm, as a board member, just talking to my friend, and I'm saying, man, I was so frustrated by whatever. So I do think, even though board members do have this duty of loyalty, I think sort of getting explicit about that because of the nature of villages is probably a good idea.
Bill?
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing, which is, remember, if somebody is, bad mouthing or saying, second guessing the decisions of the board, maybe where there's smoke, there's fire. So you've got to take it seriously and at least, consider what the person is saying and seeing if there's a way to address it. So it's not a, either or, black or white situation.
And I would add to that, Bill, it's both the content and the process. So if you do learn of something like that, you can say, A, I hear something's wrong. Can I check in with you and say, what's on your mind? What are you unhappy about? What are you concerned about? And B, in the future, if you have such a concern, let's figure out a better way of communicating things, and here are the proper channels for processing your concerns. And if you feel like you're not being heard, then let's talk about that, because I think it's always good when you have group dynamics to spend some time, and that goes back to all my comments from the very beginning. We can talk about the process of us working together. And it's always good to check in, like, is this communication working well? Are we getting along? Is there something that you feel like we're not really touching on? Pause the content, because people sometimes in board meetings have so much on their business agenda. They're like, okay, check, talk about this, check, talk about this. And you don't spend enough time about, hey, let's just check in. How are we doing? How does this feel to you? And it's really important to spend some time and talk about the process itself to maybe head off.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that, Anita, if I may.
Yep.
Both of you.
It's interesting to think about the reasons why that could happen. Sometimes it's just an angry person and wants to get their word out there. But I've been on a board where there was someone who always was not, it was in the minority, and often a minority of one with regarding the decisions that we made. And we all worked really hard. I was board chair for part of this to say, this is really important to always have anyone who has an opposing point of view to be able to be heard in the meetings appropriately. So I think that's just an example that I hope amplifies what Pazit was saying, that if there isn't space for someone to disagree or feel like they're being heard, then it can bubble out in what we would say is an inappropriate way and cause problems to happen. So it is that constant communication, that constant check-in, and the invitation and the really the setting that the board chair creates, whether you're following Robert's rules of orders or not, how you chair a meeting, how you facilitate a meeting, which not all of us are always well trained in, honestly, to be able to do that well. So I just wanted to amplify that a little bit. Anita, apologies for jumping in.
No, a perfect setup, because I totally agree and would have said, hopefully, some of the things you said about if the person is talking to other members and not the board chair about this issue, that means that there's something the board chair needs to think about, some communication thing there, because it's just like having kids. And I think, if mom and dad are not responsive to what the kids are saying, then it's going to be somebody else who hears about it. So, or whatever the setting is, it just has to go somewhere. But I think Kathy should also have maybe gone on to say, this can really, these skills and the comfort level of communicating with one another in an open way really get enhanced when you do some board training together. And I served on boards starting when I was in my 30s in my profession. And I didn't have any board training until I was well into my 50s, maybe closer to 60. And it was sort of like the light went on and it was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, there's just so many things that a board training experience give you, even if you have excellent professional people, and to do it together with any paid staff is my favorite way of doing it.
Thank you. And Seal, I know you have your hand up. Apologies, but just to say sometimes when we say board training, it doesn't have to be a half day once a year. You can slide these things into your regular meeting schedule, 10 minutes on X, a handout on Y, to keep it as an ongoing learning process. So it doesn't, sometimes we think, oh my God, we got to get a consultant, we got to do a half day. It's a big thing. Yes, that is important in some cases to do longer times, but it doesn't always have to be that way.
Seal, and then I just want to recognize something in the chat and share another thought. And we have 5 more minutes, so we have lots to squeeze. Go ahead, Seal.
Sorry, guys. I'll be brief here. It was as you were talking about board members and recognizing that we might have things that we disagree on, and when we leave the confines of the meeting, we go forward and we all speak as a united front, as it were. It made me think about something in our own village's board construct. Years ago, one of our original, he wasn't a founder, but a very involved original member, was on our board for a number of years. And he was known, I think proudly known, as the fellow who would be the devil's advocate and play that role in the meeting. And it was such an important, he played such an important role as we have thought through some difficult issues. He was always the one who sometimes brought up difficult issues after, you know, and you've been in a board meeting for an hour and a half, you're like, oh God, we're gonna talk about this. But you know what? I think we are such a collegial, our board is so collegial and everyone gets along so well. I think we don't have someone like that now. And that gives me thought as to what can we do to encourage that and to say, you know, the board meeting isn't just to everybody to sign off. You know, we need some, you're here because we respect your perspective and let's get it out there. Sometimes I wonder, are we having enough tough talk? Does that make sense? I just want to make sure, you know, what can we do to make sure our board members know they can bring it up? And because I feel like we don't have that kind of, I don't know, it was just an observation that came to me, and recognizing how valuable it was in an earlier version of our board. I don't know. That's
Beautiful
all.
point. I think sometimes when I see a village in development, they say you are an exercise in democracy and you don't want groupthink, because democracy is about diversity of opinions, and that's how you reach a better choice, by hearing differing opinion and views, and then you're able to sort of hammer out a solution that maybe incorporates some of the dissent or some of the reservation people might have. That's an excellent point, Seal. I would like to recognize a lot of the resources that people have shared on the chat. I'm not going to read them out loud, we don't have time, but please scroll over the chat, and if we can save, Mary Alice, if you can save that and perhaps consolidate some of those recommendations for links for board resources, and perhaps WAVE can consider micro trainings on different topics that pertain to board training. We can compile a list of topics and people can choose things to share during their board meetings. I want to respect everyone's time and stick to the time allotted to us, and thank everybody that participated, but especially to our wonderful panelists, Anita, Bill, Kathy, and Cecile for helping with planning, and Mary Jo. And thanks to everybody and my parents that gave birth to me. If you know, this is the bar mitzvah. Thank you everybody for sharing their life and their joys, and you know, the thank yous.
Pazzi, you're so funny. So we will be soon saying goodbye to Pazzi. We're going to let her resume her trip to Israel and the things that she's doing there. And then what we're going to do is continue the conversation in our breakout rooms. And they're essentially, we assign them, you know, alphabetically. So Bill Emmett is in the first breakout, Kathy is in the second breakout, and Anita is in the third. And it's just basically smaller group conversations where we can get real if we need to and kind of talk through some issues. We are going to let folks choose whichever breakout room they go to. And I want to point out, we always share the recordings of the breakouts and the general session about a week or so after the meetings. And in this case, we have a couple of handouts from speakers that will also accompany the recording. So look for that from WAVE a little bit later. It's 11 o'clock now. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then resume back in the breakout rooms. And as Mary Jo pointed out at the beginning of the meeting, we will not re-adjourn in the general meeting. When the breakouts are done, we go back to our lives, our day jobs. So
Still
thank
very
you all.
quickly, still quickly, I think Mary Ellis should probably give us some instructions about how they're going to get into their breakout sessions.
She is.